two discussants with us today from the University of Pretoria. We have Ibrahim Hussein and Ms. Wegaye Bogale, who will be discussing the two presentations. At the end, we reserved about 20-25 minutes for Q&A. So I would encourage you to note down all your questions while we go through the presentations so that we can have a lively discussion and questions and answer session at the end. So without much further ado, Cheryl, I'll hand over to you for some welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you to the AKADEMIYA2063 team for setting up the webinar. Thank you, Greenwell and Ishmael, for in anticipation of your presentations. This is a very important topic because I think not only have we got so much to learn from what happened during the COVID lockdowns, but as countries start to ease them, perhaps prematurely in some cases, we need to learn those lessons and to focus on what we can learn and implement from those. But given the added crisis and the added complex with the war in the Ukraine, we really do need to learn about the responses of African governments to major global crises and how they affect the local supply of food and of nutrients for sound nutrition. So please jot down your questions. Please be ready to engage and let's have a good debate around not just the content that Greenwell and Ishmael will present to you because it's extremely rich, but also how that affects the current situation in the globe. So thank you also in advance to Wega and Ibrahim. I'm very proud of you for sticking up your hands and being willing to be the discussants. So we look forward to what you can generate in the conversation as well. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. And yeah, just a couple of housekeeping points before I hand over to Greenwell. This meeting is being recorded and it's also live streamed, I see, on our YouTube channel, and the recording will of course be made available to you shortly. You can either raise your hands later during the Q&A session, but you can also pop any questions that come up during the presentations in the chat below. So over to you, Greenwell.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Can you see something there?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, let me just put in presentation mode. Okay. I wonder why it's not coming into presentation mode, this one.
Yeah, it seems the cursor is not moving to the right place.
Yeah, so I want to see that's not nice. This time, okay, let me just try to share it again.
Yeah, if it doesn't work in presentation mode, I think we can see the slides quite clearly as well, like that.
All right, okay. So let's see if it becomes possible to share it in presentation mode, then I'm going to do that. But meanwhile, yes, thanks very much for everybody for coming. My name is Greenwell Machaya, and I work with the International Water Management Institute. Well, I'm based at the International Water Management Institute. I'm a coordinator for research for Eastern and Southern Africa, which most of you already know. It's a program by Academia. And I am going to present this work today, which is really not my work. It's work by a group of researchers at Academia and the other institutions. I've put the names here so that I am accountable. The title of this presentation is The Impact of COVID-19 on Agricultural Commodity Prices. And we are looking at the fact that location seems to matter. So location matters. Okay, so the presentation will touch on the introduction, the methodology. It also talk about deficit as well as surplus areas, and then what happens in urban as well as rural areas, coastal as well as landlocked countries, and we also close by looking at what happened to perishable and non-perishable commodities, and then I'll give some key messages. So as most of you know already, COVID-19 was introduced in Africa in around 2020, in the early parts of that year. And immediately countries started taking control measures to try and curb the spread of the pandemic. And those control measures took several forms. For example, there were restrictions on the movement of people, market bans, border crossing restrictions, curfews, etc. All these were really well intended, because I think what was very important at that time was to make sure that people don't catch it. Okay, but unfortunately, although those were well intended, they also had some kind of consequences inadvertently. For example, they led to market disruptions and revenue losses for vulnerable groups by disrupting supply as well as demand for agricultural commodities, including agricultural staples. In this analysis, we do focus on staple markets across the continent to understand the impact of the potential impact of the COVID-19 crisis on prices. So basically, the expected price behavior due to COVID-19 can be as follows. So we expected that in the surplus areas, one would expect that prices would fall below expected levels and recover after confinement measures were lifted. That's what we would expect. But also in deficit areas, because there isn't enough of the staples commodities, then we would expect prices to go above predicted levels during the confinement, but maybe they would also recover after the confinement or after easing of some of those measures. However, the extent obviously to which the prices would deviate from the predicted prices would depend on several things, and among others, on their access to surplus markets and on changes in demand of particular groups, so like schools, universities, restaurants, hotels, etc. So depending on how demand from those ones change, then the resultant demand would also, change. Okay, and in urban areas, and for the perishable commodities, again, low prices were expected as demand declined. Therefore, market connections, the typology of those markets, and the policy options taken may affect the behavior of those prices. Okay. Now, to do the analysis, we relied on monthly data from national market information systems. These covered a number of countries: Benin, Burkina Faso, Kenya, Lesotho, Malawi, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, Zambia, as well as Uganda. So a good coverage of the Western, Eastern, and Southern Africa region. And the commodities that we covered included maize flour, rice, Gari, and millet, as well as matoke for the case of Uganda. And here are just the numbers of markets that we studied. And this is about the period over which data was available for each of those price series. Okay. Now, in order to answer some of the questions that we put forward, we employed the seasonal autoregressive integrated moving average model, the SARIMA, to calculate the price trends first in the absence of the COVID-19 for purposes of forecasting. Then, so the data available up to December 2019 was used to select and identify the models with the best power for forecasting purposes. And then we kind of forecast the prices for the year 2020 during the lockdown period, the immediate lockdown period, using the models that we will have calibrated using data which ended in December 2019. And then we'll then look at the gaps between the predicted prices and the observed prices. So the possible effect of market disruption due to mainly COVID pandemic and various related restrictive measures would then be thought of as constituting that gap or generating that price gap. So the results that we present here, we are grouped in terms of locations, as the topic of this presentation is, because we're saying location matters. So we group the results in terms of rural versus urban markets, deficit versus surplus markets, and then coastal versus landlocked countries, and then perishable versus non-perishable commodities. All right, so the results that we found showed some interesting patterns. So for example, these tables, these figures here, on the left panel, we're showing the proportion of markets in deficit areas according to the level of deviation from the price predictions. So we calculated the deviation of prices from the predicted ones, and then looked at how many markets seem to be showing prices that are deviating from the predicted ones, and what is the level of that deviation from there. So we grouped those deviations from 5% between negative 5% to all the way to 15%. So if it's positive, it means basically we're saying the prices are changing, but they'll be increasing. If it's negative, the prices are changing, but they're declining. So in the deficit markets, obviously we would expect that normally, because it's a deficit market, most of the prices, the price changes, they need to be upward. So we have to be seeing an increase in prices because there's no trade taking place from at least outside, or there's limited trade, although demand is also impacted on, but the fact that it's already a deficit area, we should expect that prices are going to go up. So if you look at what was happening in March, which is immediately after the COVID pandemic was introduced in Africa and countries that started taking measures, you start seeing that in each country, it depended, of course, it varied from one country to the other, but the general picture is that in some countries, of course, you're seeing that there is a rising. So if you see these colors, it's like there is a rise in some of the markets. The rise in prices in some of the markets, whereas of course there were still some markets which saw a reduction in prices. But if you compare, at least for the West African countries, you'll find that that is not much. Generally speaking, the prices tended to go up. Okay, so in Nigeria, for example, right away, the prices were going up. I think more than 70% of the markets, they were experiencing increases in prices. In Senegal, the same, prices increasing, and a good proportion of them also really increasing by more than, or deviating from the predictions by more than 15%, meaning that they were also rising. The exceptions are here, Uganda, and I think we'll also explain this later, as well as in Rwanda. This is where the prices were kind of coming down over that same period. But when you see also in the markets that were surplus markets, to see what is happening in the same month of March, in surplus markets, we generally expect that the prices should be coming down, simply because you have too much staple commodities there. Surplus is high, and then prices have to go down, holding demand constant, or even if it just drops a little bit. So here you find that, yes, in Burkina Faso, the prices seem to be rising, and they're rising more actually than, declining, and they're declining more than they were declining in the deficit markets, which is expected. And some are increasing, but still you can see that there is a tendency for them to decline, including in Senegal, or we can see even the ratio, the proportion of markets which saw a decline in the in prices seems to be a bit higher than in the deficit markets within Senegal. And you come to Kenya. At first, seems like there's an increase in the number of markets that were experiencing a decline in prices. But in Rwanda, as well as in Uganda, I think 100% of the markets were in surplus areas were seeing a decline in prices. You go to May, similar stuff happening, but in May also, you find that in Burkina Faso now, most of the markets are experiencing a rise. And in Nigeria, 100% of the markets are experiencing a rise in prices. In Senegal, almost every market is also experiencing a rise. The only difference is the degree of the rise. And in Kenya, there is a mix there. In Rwanda, there's still a decline in prices, and in Uganda too. The same in May in Uganda and in Rwanda, there's a decline in the prices. But you find that in Senegal, almost everywhere, the prices are increasing. And in Nigeria, most of the markets are experiencing an increase in price. So what is happening here is that two different patterns appear to emerge when you compare the price trends in deficit and surplus areas. So in West Africa, the prices increased in both the deficit and the surplus areas, or at least there was a tendency to increase, but they increased more in deficit areas. If you just look at the West Africa, the panels, but prices fell with the lifting of restrictions, for example, in Burkina Faso and Mali towards May, while the pressure on the prices remained significant in Senegal as well as in Nigeria, even as we went to May in 2020. In contrast, though, in the Eastern and Southern Africa region, there was a general downward trend in prices, regardless of whether the market was in deficit as well as in surplus areas. Of course, there were some exceptions. Exceptions in Southern Africa included markets in Lesotho and Kenya, where price trends were similar to that of West African countries. So the behavior was almost like what we were seeing in West Africa, that there was a general rise in prices in some of the markets there. So cross-border sales to neighboring countries in the Southern and East Africa region, we think may have played a significant role in determining pre-COVID-19 price behavior across those countries. And therefore, when the COVID came and restrictions came into play, the tendency was to go down because these countries trade significantly with each other. If you think of Malawi, Zambia, even Rwanda, Kenya, etc., in the East Africa region. and the potential, therefore, of negative impact from the observed price decline, decline in prices shows the critical importance of trans-border trade for smallholder farmers and small businesses. Okay. And again, now, if you say, let's look at rural versus urban areas, and we consider these countries again, and let's start with examining the rural areas. So in the rural areas, we normally expect that they might have sufficient amount of maize because these are centers of production. So we would expect that maybe prices have to decline if the rural area is in a country that produces that is strong in agriculture. If you look at Mali, though, you tend to look, the blue ones are the actual prices, whereas this other color are the predicted prices. You'll find that the actual prices were tended to be higher than the predicted ones. So prices are rising there in rural areas of Mali. And then, but when you look at Malawi, say you look at in Sundwe market, you find that in Sundwe market, the predicted prices are higher over that period than the observed prices, meaning that prices were going down, which corroborates also what we were saying previously. And then in Rwanda, the predicted prices appear to be higher than what was observed. So in Rwanda, again, there's a decline in prices in those rural areas. So in some, the COVID-19 measures can impact rural and urban incomes, movements differently. Prices went up in rural markets of West Africa, for example, in Mali, but there were also Senegal, etc. I just haven't presented the results here, but declined in rural areas of Eastern and Southern Africa. Again, the exception in Southern Africa was Lesotho, and I think Lesotho gets that exception from the fact that it's not a strong producer of maize and it only trades with South Africa. So if South Africa closes the borders, and it means they are likely going to suffer more there, and no wonder there was also an increase in prices there. So those two factors. So note that prices also increased in urban areas of Mali and declined in urban areas of Rwanda and Malawi. So they're following an interesting pattern there. If you just look at the urban areas, again, you find that if you go to Senegal and you look at the prices from St. Louis in Senegal, then the observed prices appear to be higher than the predicted prices. So the prices were increasing there, which corroborates with the figures I showed earlier. And in Lesotho, again, you find that the actual prices are also higher than the predicted prices. In Cape Karen in Kenya, okay, not as clear, but still, we find that the observed prices appear to be lower than the predicted prices in the urban centers. If you take a look there, you find that the prices went up in urban markets for West Africa, as well as including Senegal, for example, but declined in rural markets of Eastern and Southern Africa, including Kenya, in Eastern, including Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda, and Southern Africa, including Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, with the exception of Lesotho. The decline in prices was more in urban centers than in rural areas. I think this is extra information. I didn't present the graph there. Prices were also generally lower in urban markets than in markets of West Africa, signifying the differential impact of restrictions on demand in these places. And again, when you look at coastal versus landlocked countries, here interestingly, we did expect that countries that are linked to the sea, that have access to the sea, should see its trade not as compromised, and therefore the prices needed not rise much compared to the markets in countries without access to the sea, because I think the sea simplifies trade. That is what we thought. Of course, in this one, and it might be attributed to the fact that there was kind of a tremendous amount of restrictions to trade over the period that we studied. We note that there was no dichotomous price pattern which emerged between the coastal and the landlocked countries. So here, Mozambique is seeing price decline, okay, downward price trend. It is a coastal region, but Nigeria also has a coast, and yet we still see that there's also a rise in prices and a small decline in prices. Again, the picture is not so much clear because here Uganda, it's landlocked, Rwanda is landlocked, but they seem to also see a price decline. So what we think also here is the fact that what I've already alluded to, it does not mean that access to the sea does not simplify trade, but over the period that we studied, restrictions were high. So it's possible that that's the reason why you can't see that dichotomy between the landlocked and the coastal countries. So in those areas, the internal forces were more key in determining price differentials. When you look at perishable commodities.
Sorry to interrupt, Greenwell. You have about 3 minutes left. It would be
okay, 3 minutes. Okay, I'll make it. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, if you look at the perishable versus non-perishable commodities, we say that because the perishable commodities really are, you cannot hold them, you can't store them for long because since they will rot, the demand tends to be the determiner for prices. So if demand is disrupted, then if it shifts downwards, the prices will also fall. When we studied the Matoke price trends during that period of COVID, when demand fell, we also saw that there was tremendous amount of drop in prices for the commodity. So Matoke is perishable, and indeed, in some cases, you see 48% decline in those in prices. Let me go to the key messages before I'm closed out. So the key messages I think here are that, yeah, we focus on the local staples and community level markets, which are often overlooked in international data analysis efforts. And in most of these countries examined, price effects of the COVID-19 crisis propagated very quickly across space and as well as time. And the magnitude of price deviations are also increased very quickly. In some countries, the shock caused prices to rise and in deficit areas and decline in surplus areas as transport restrictions took hold. But in countries that export staples regionally, for example, Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, etc., Kenya, Rwanda, trade restrictions overrode those effects and prices fell both in surplus as well as in deficit areas, especially in the Southern Africa region. And in response, so therefore, to future shocks, it would be useful that care should be taken to minimize disruptions in local markets, in local market operations. Effects of local market disruptions on incomes can be very severe and devastating, especially for the poor. And therefore, we should avoid blanket policy responses that do not really take into account the heterogeneities in terms of space, market types, etc. And interventions should be based on some good understanding of the different factors that might compound the effects of staple food price behavior at local level. But also they need to be targeted support to food production and distribution services accompanied by consumer support interventions in order to stabilize prices if a similar crisis come. And more importantly, it is important that measures should be coordinated between countries in order to avoid suffering on the import-dependent countries, but also even on the exporting, the agribusinesses and farmers who rely on exports of their commodities in order to earn a living. With that, I could come to the end of the presentation. Thanks very much. This is just an information slide, academia page, research, and email. Thank you very much. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Greenwell, for this very good presentation. Really interesting to listen to you. And now looking forward to the comments prepared by Ibrahim. So Ibrahim, over to you, please. I understand you have a few slides as well to share.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Ibrahim.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Machaya, for this presentation. I found the presentation very interesting. And then not only because it's focused on the sub-Saharan African countries, but also it's actually prioritized some of the indigenous staples food in Africa, especially from where I come from, which is Gari and Matuke from Uganda. I have some few comments on this presentation, and I want to start by saying that for the Lesotho maize flour price, actually Lesotho is import-dependent countries, and then we realized from the presentation that Lesotho also produce some maize locally, but it's not that much. So it will be very interesting to know that to know the discrepancy in the prices between the maize flours, the local maize flour produced in Lesotho, and the one being imported into the country. And again, we realized from the presentation that the price in the rural area is actually rising above the urban. The maize flour from rural area is actually higher than the urban area. One will be interested to know the social protection being implemented during the time of lockdown, and even after the lockdown, what are the mechanisms that are put in place to help people? Is it that it's dominated in urban than rural, and that is why the rural populace actually buying their maize flour so high more than the urban areas? So the second part of it is actually look the same for the Rwanda maize prices. For the Rwanda maize price, we realized that the urban there was a low price in Rwanda, especially generally there was low price in maize during the lockdown, and it's actually because there was a surplus in the system, and then no more people to buy their maize. And we know that also from the presentation that the rural area, the rural area actually buying lesser than the urban area. They are buying their low price is actually affecting the low price in urban area is dominated above the rural area. And so from here, I want to also emphasize on the issue of maybe there was imported stock in the urban area, and the social protection being put in place in the urban area were actually being reflected as a yardstick in which the urban people were buying buying their maize grains at a low price. So that is my second observation. And the third observation is actually related to increase in price of Gari in Nigeria. So the Gari in Nigeria is actually Nigeria is the most relevant staple food in Nigeria, but as well we have rice. That rice is more staple than Gari in Nigeria. But it was before the COVID-19 pandemic, before the lockdown as a result of COVID-19, Nigeria actually faced a problem of importation, a lot of importation from rice, and the government actually put a ban against the importation of rice, and as a result of that, there was increase in rice price. So because of that, a lot of poor people actually shifted from rice to Gari, and that was the reason why this presentation actually get it right to give the result that there was an increase in Gari during the lockdown, even after the lockdown, there was a rise in the price of Gari. So it is actually very correct, and I want to commend the presenter, the researchers on this aspect. So now another thing I want to say is on the intervention that are needed to avoid the risk of malnutrition. Actually, the study focus on price, but a lot of people who cannot buy the cheaper staples will actually also be affected at the end of the day. They will be malnourished at the end of the day. So one will be interested to see the recommendation on which the government should actually put in place some mechanism that will look into the reduction of malnutrition in future. So another thing I want to comment on is on the results from the predicted prices. So the predicted prices actually work so well in the presentation, but I would like to know that is there one want to know the result of the test that make the data being accurate for seasonal autoregressive integrated moving average model statistically. One would like to know the result statistically. So now, lastly, I want to also ask on the within country period of implementing containment. It's actually not reflected in the article. The article is not, because I see the Nigerian situation as an example. In Nigeria, the implementation of this containment measure during the COVID-19 is actually systematic and gradual. It is not just at once. So, and it actually started from the urban area, and gradually moving to the rural area. One would want to know how prices are being displayed in this area, in the area in which the implementation of measures are putting in place against the price of the staples. So, and this will actually be for maybe for further studies. So these are my observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. And although we obviously have a Q&A session at the end, after both presentations, I'd like to give Greenwell the opportunity to perhaps react to some of your comments. Greenwell, would you like to come in?
Yes, sure. I think these are very good comments, Ibrahim. And I tend also to agree with so some of the explanations, like the reason why in rural areas you might find that the prices appear to be high in some cases than the urban centers. So just as he mentioned that it's possible that some other social protection measures started in the urban areas owing to convenience, I think that that one it's very possible. But there's also another one which is very likely, Ibrahim, and which we try to I think explain. It is to do with the fact that once the measures have been introduced in a country, the first places where they enforce them so strongly are the urban centers. It's only after that, and it's only after that also in the rural areas you'll find that there is enforcement. Even now, if you move across the countries, you'll find that if you are in urban centers, you're more likely to find people with face masks. They're worried about the COVID. If you go into the rural areas, almost like the masks also almost disappear. So owing to that differential effect of the policies, you find that in the urban centers, maybe demand goes down more compared to the rural areas. As a result, the prices are going to be slightly lower on top of the social protection. And that likely applies also to both Rwanda and to Lesotho. The other comment which you had there related to Nigeria, I agree with you. I did not notice about the ban on rice imports, but obviously if they did, that also needed to go to and needed to have an impact on the price of Gari, because these are they're used as substitutes in that case. On malnourishment, it would be good. I think how a country would start using these results, part of these results, to think about malnourishment is if they take them as a starting point. So to identify winners and losers. So you already start seeing that in urban centers, something's happening, or in rural areas, the impact is also different. And depending on that, now you need to start going to the areas where they're seeing a big price, say, decline. If you're looking at producers, then you know that these are farmers who are in trouble. So programs that try to solve those you can start coming up with programs that try to solve that, because in that case, farmers want to have enough income from the sale of maize to buy other things to supplement their food needs. You also talked about the potential future research areas, like the within country variation in terms of application. So application of the restrictions. This is similar to what I'm also saying between the urban and rural areas. The urban centers appear to face the restrictions first than the other ones, than the rural centers. I think it would indeed be interesting to see even the degree to which those restrictions are enforced, and try also to just see how does that relate to the price outcomes over time. I think it can also be an interesting angle to look at. There was another comment you made on the statistical results on the SARIMA. So on the SARIMA ones, basically for us, we were using different. So ARIMA analysis is kind of standard. So we were looking at stats, different statistics, the mean square errors, the information criteria, etc., to compare the results, to compare the models, allowing the looking at auto-correlation functions, etc. And then after we see that a model seems to be passing many of those tests, then we choose that for the predictions. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Greenwell. Sorry, I dropped out for a moment because of a power cut. So I just rejoined using my phone. Apologies for that. But yeah, thank you for your reactions. And I think it's now time to hand over to Ismail for his presentation. But of course, Greenwell, there will be more opportunity to interact with our audience during the Q&A. So Ismail, over to you for your presentation on the impact of COVID-19 related global trade disruptions on African food systems.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
All right, thank you. So let me have it on presentation mode. All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, depending on where you are. My name is Ismail Fofana. I work for AKADEMIYA2063. I am the Director for Capacity and Deployment. First of all, let me thank AKADEMIYA2063 and the University of Pretoria for inviting me to present this piece of work on the impact of COVID-19 related global trade disruption on Africa food systems, which is the chapter 4 of the 2021 annual trend and outlook report of RISAX. This is a teamwork. You have down there the authors that have been part of this work, myself, but also Alassane Camara from the University of Sherbrooke in Canada, and my colleagues, AKADEMIYA2063, Mariam Jallo, and Lisa Sal. So without further ado, so let me get to the outline. So basically I will be, my presentation will be structured into the 6 points. Basically point 1 and 2, introduction and objective of the analysis. We'll talk about the why, a little bit the background and the motivation behind this analysis. And then point 3 and 4, I'll be discussing the methodology and presenting the scenarios that we have used here. It's a bit the how did we undertake this study. And then point 5 and 6, here I will be discussing the findings and the key recommendations, which is basically the what, what's coming out of the analysis. So what we have observed is the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a major disruption in the global trade and markets of primary commodities. Here in this graph, we compare estimate prices with predicted prices. Basically, we compare the 2020 prices to 2019 prices using the estimate price data that the World Bank is computing computing on a daily basis for primary commodities. And we compare that estimate with what was predicted prior to the pandemic, which is the latest prediction that they published was in October 2019. So they made some prediction of prices for 2020. So basically we compute the changes between 2019 and 2020 for both the predictions and the estimates. And then we make a simple difference between them, which is now what we have here is a percentage point difference between the estimated prices and the predicted price changes, So basically what you observe is for most commodities, especially energy commodities that you have here in red, prices are down. And then also for agricultural inputs, fertilizer, mostly prices are also declining. And for most of the metals, base metals, you have also prices going down, except iron and copper. On the other hand, you can see that prices are up for precious metals, gold, silver, in most cases, prices are up. The story for the agriculture commodities, agriculture and food commodities is a bit mixed. Some prices are up, some prices are down, but most prices are a little bit are increasing. So if you take a case of palm oil, groundnut oil, coconut oil, prices are increasing significantly. You look at barley, maize, and meat, chicken, prices are going down. So there's a mixed story here. When you look at the trading volumes for primary commodities and most of the commodities that are traded, using here the high frequency shipping data information, you can see that traded prices, traded volumes, are declining for all commodities. You can see here, identify agriculture commodities, fishing here, where prices are declining close to 10%, and agriculture prices are declining by 7%, and then you have food and beverage a little bit by 6%. So here also, then basically the story is most commodity prices are declining, and also we can see that the trading volume also are going down because of the COVID pandemic. Then we look at how the trade structure of African countries, are really linked to the primary commodities. So basically what you have on your left-hand side is the share of primary commodities in total export for several African countries. So you can see that for most African countries, if you draw a line on the 50% here, you see that more than 2/3 of African countries have a share of primary commodities in the total export higher than 50%. So basically saying that the export are heavily dependent on primary commodities. On the other hand, you look at the imports, most of them are below 50%. Only have 3 countries where the import are the import of primary commodities, or the total primary commodity shares, weight more than 50% than their in their total imports. So basically, African countries tend to export, primary commodities and import, finished commodities or finished goods. Then the objective of the analysis was to assess exports. What is the impact of a disruption that we have observed in the primary commodity trade and market in Africa? Here we consider 23 selected African countries. Basically, why this is important, the statistic that we're going to collect on the ground in 2020 on the economic variables, and the macro and some micro, basically combine all kind of shocks, and also the policy responses. All right, basically it's going to be difficult to disentangle or to identify the contribution of a specific shocks in that in the way it has been affecting African countries. So this kind of ex post analysis allow us to then just assess the contributions of a specific channel of transmission. The international the trade primary commodity global trade is only one out of many other channels of transmission, how the COVID-19 has been transmitted to African economies. Basically, our interest here was to look at how the food system, will be performing with that external shocks, going through the trading of primary commodities. And by food system, basically we included several segments according to the methodology that we're using. So basically, we look at the production parts side, we look at the processing side, we look at the food system, food services also part of it, and then the trade and consumption. And also we compute some aggregate values for the supply chain in general. For each segment, you can see that the supply segment, we are interested in looking at how the production has been impacted, how the input costs have changed, because of the global disruption in the global trade of primary commodities, but also how the output prices have evolved, value additions in the sector, but also employment. So those 5 variables has been considered for the entire supply chains. So from the production to the processing, including also food services. And also we aggregate these values, the entire supply chain, to see how the entire supply chain has been impacted. When it comes to trade, we look at import and export for both segments, import of agriculture goods, processed foods, food services. When we talk about tourism here, it's food services. if this country is highly dependent on tourism, then you're more likely that food services will be, will be impacted severely. And then we look at the import also along those lines, the aggregate value, but the agriculture, food processing, food services, and consumption now part include the income side, but also the consumption, the price impacts too. So here, this is where we include GDP, employment in general, not employment only in those specific value chains, but employment for the national economy. We look at employment for rural, urban. We look at consumption prices at national, rural, urban also, and look at expenditure also, how expenditure has been affected nationally, but rural expenditure and urban expenditure. And then we look at now consumptions, which is the real, the volume that is consumed by. So basically all those variables were considered to appreciate the impact of the disruptions, the shock on the food system. So in terms of methodology, we use the single country computable general equilibrium models, CGE models, that we have in our toolbox. So you have developed over time, a large number of single country CGE models, around more than 40 for African countries. And then we tape on that into that, that large variety of models and also countries here. But you can see that we only, the focus was only on 33 countries, because the 33 countries, the data was, available to do this food system analysis. Other countries we had, the data was not really suitable for the analysis. So then some of the models or many database that we have available was not up to date. So we used the World Development Indicator database for 2019 and 2018, and also the statistic on international trade from the United Nations, in order to update the database that you have behind the models. And finally, we use the primary commodity price data that the World Bank, I talked about it earlier, that the World Bank published, twice a year. And also the high frequency shipping data coming from a study in 2021 by these authors, Cox and all, to build our simulations, to build the simulation scenarios. Because of the number of indicators that we are looking, we have included in the analysis. Basically, we come up with a score in order to appreciate, the sensibility of the food system, to the external shock, the COVID-19, shock. Basically, the score computes the number of indicators that has been adversely impacted versus compared to the total number of indicators. So if you have a 50% score for a specific country, it means that 50% of those indicators that I was discussing earlier has been negatively affected, or let's say adversely affected by the shock. Basically, that's the way we rank countries. Then in terms of scenarios, we had we built two scenarios. We built what we call the COVID scenario, and we built the business as usual scenario. The COVID scenario is based on estimate. This study was done in 2021. So in 2021, we already had information on how prices have changed in 2020, and we know how we just make a difference between the two and see, okay, how prices have evolved. That's for the price shock, but also for the volume shock, we did the same thing. We have information on how the volumes have changed in 2019 and 2020 using the high frequency shipping data. Now, the counterfactual was the one that which is the business as usual scenario, was a little bit challenging. Basically, what we did for the price shocks is we look at the predictions that was made in October 2019 before the pandemic hit, and then we compare to the 2019 prices, and we say, okay, if there was no COVID, this is how prices will have evolved. All right, so that is our business as usual scenario, and we did the same for the prediction of volumes. Now, there are some volumes we did not have individual volumes. Volumes for how volumes was. The prediction of volumes for individual commodities. We have it as aggregate value from the World Economic Outlook. So we know for different countries how the export and import will have evolved, and then that's what the information we use for as a business as usual scenario. In terms of findings, basically you can see for the 23 countries that we have covered, that the impact range from 80% in Kenya to 13% in Guinea. Basically, 80% meaning that 80% of the indicators, the variables that we have considered, has been impacted adversely or negatively compared to the, has been impacted adversely. While in case of Guinea, it's only 30%. But if you take the entire 23 countries, the average is 37%. This is the reason why we say we finally concluded that the impact has been moderate, for the set of countries that we are country specific. Some countries are highly hit, have highly been impacted. Others has a low, impact, depending on the structure of their trade and the type of commodity they are trading. We have seen that not all commodities has been impacted. Some are impacted negatively. Some commodities has been impacted positively. So basically, country like Guinea is exporting, gold, and gold has contributing. The increase of price of gold has contributed to really increase income, and then has impacted positively the food system in general. And by like country like Kenya, for instance, exporting coffee and tea, so those commodities has been impacted negatively. So when you look at now by category of country, so we group countries by what we call agriculture exporter, mineral exporter, and other exporter. Other exporter for us is really mixed. Those have a mixed basket of agriculture and mineral. Basically, when you say agriculture, you need to have 80% of your 70 or 80% of your export, which is agriculture based. When it's to your mineral exporters, so 80%, 70 or 80% of your export basket has to be mineral based. Now, those who are between the two are considered as diversified countries, others. So the main findings here is, those countries who has diversified export basket are less affected than the others. So if you see here, in average, we have 37% of, like I presented in the previous slide, but you can see that those who have diversified basket export basket have been affected only by 29%, while agriculture and mineral is around 40%. And then we look at across the food value, the food system are basically those segments that we have considered in our analysis. You can see here that processing, so by processing here is food processing, but also is food services, all right? The services is a, advanced stage of processing foods. So food processing and food services are the more, been, more hit by the shock, all right? So they are more sensitive to the COVID shock. Here you can understand because of the elasticity of this kind of consumption. So their consumption is more elastic than, you know, when you talk about agricultural goods or agricultural commodities. And then not surprisingly, also consumption is more, the consumption part of the food system has, you know, been more, let's say, I'm not going to say resilience, but less sensitive to the shock. Here also you can understand because of the consumption smoothing behavior of consumer to make that's also can be understandable here. And then finally, so the major takeaway and recommendation that came out of the analysis was the diversification is important to prepare countries to future shocks, external shocks, like the one like COVID-1, but it can be other different type of shocks. So countries need to diversify their export basket in order to build resilience against future shocks. And the other one that we have not directly analyzed here is basically looking at how the way across the food system, how different segments have been impacted. We saw that the food services and food processing was the most severely hit. Basically, what other countries did in order to make sure that these activities continue during the pandemic is to embrace digital technology. This is not something that we have analyzed directly, but it's coming just as a recommendation saying that if countries embrace digital technology, then they will be also more prepared to face all the future shocks, especially to strengthen that specific segment of the value chain, which is food processing and the food services segment. I'll thank you for your attention, and I look forward for your comments and questions. Back to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ismail. Really great presentation. We're running slightly behind, so I will hand straight over to Wegayehu for her comments, and then we can move to Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and also see your slides.
Okay, thank you, Ismail, for the nice presentation and the nice work. So I'm glad to know 23 African countries have a data to analyze using CGE model, and then even like a multidimensional food system. So this is just the introduction or general overview of the study. So let me move to the finding. This helped me to give the comment for the paper. And the study found the global economic shock of COVID pandemic drove most of the commodity price down, and the price of energy and metal is much lower than agriculture and other products. So the international price for the precious metal is forecasted to rise, and the COVID-related shock is on average adversely affecting 37% in Africa. And the study found food processing is by far, it is most vulnerable. And I'm surprised why Kenya is 18% than others. So my question is starting from this graph, and Kenya is putting under the category of agricultural dominating countries, while the other three countries, the top other three countries are under the category of energy and metal dominant countries. So is there any possible reason why Kenya is highly adverse than other countries? Because as I mentioned, Kenya is agricultural dominated, and agriculture is not that much affected by the shock. This is the first question. And the other graph that grabbed my attention is, in this case, Rwanda is also agricultural dominant countries. And as we see here, it's highest number. And what is the possible reason Rwanda get higher compared to other countries? So that maybe help us for the future shock, what is really happening in those countries. And the other comment is maybe, as we know, in Africa, maybe if this study is done in a developed country, this result may be work or recommended. But in Africa, I think this study missed the cross-border trade, and that means illegal trade, and then the inter-African trade. So I read one paper says 43% of African population is based on cross-border trade, their income as well as their food security or the food consumption. So if that is the case, during lockdown, most of the exporter is stopped, and then maybe this data is not capturing the production side. That means most of the rural area, it's affecting the production as well as the consumption. But if this result shows the processing is more affected, maybe this is because of lack of data in that in the production side or in that cross-border issues. So this is just my worry. Maybe in the future we need, I think, need to consider the inter-regional trade variation, because, for instance, in Southern Africa is exporting most of their product to Southern African countries. So if it is because of lack of data, I think that may be mislead. So this is my main concern or question. What is the impact of COVID in inter-Africa trade, as well as the impact of COVID cross-border trade? And then I already mentioned Kenya. Thank you so much. I also learned a lot from the paper.
Thank you very much, Megayu. Ismail, would you like to respond to those comments and the question?
All right, thank you. Thank you for the comment. Yes, basically, let me start with the last one. Actually, we only consider one transmission channels in the study, which is the global trade of primary commodities. We did not look at the other channels. You know, production is one channel. You know, some of my colleagues from other departments, you know, look at and they analyze the production side of the disruption. You know, but we did not combine production and trade and other, you know, channels that has contributed to affect African economy. So my answer here, short answer is we only consider one channel and we did not include the other channels. You know, one of the prospects, you know, of the study was to bring different channels together. What Greenwell presented, you know, the way prices were affected is a combination of different channels. All right, so we should have, you know, one things that we had in mind was to bring together those different channels and look at, you know, what will be the implication for different countries. This kind of study has been done for Kenya, not under these activities, but we did, you know, those COVID-19 impact in a couple of countries, looking at different channels, you know, including production and trade. While Rwanda and Kenya was affected differently, while they are in the same, you know, group of countries which we have named agriculture, you know, oriented country. One thing is, the short answer is because the trade structure was different between the two countries, but also the structure of the economy is different. What we find out, you know, analyzing countries one by one and looking at those are majorly affected, those are least affected, etc., is it depends on the exposure. So basically, when you're exposed to the external trade, think about here that you have prices that will be impacting your economy, but also the volumes. So basically, in the case of Kenya, the volume of the main traded commodities, which is coffee and tea, prices were not going down, they were going up because Kenya is producing mostly Arabica type of coffee. The prices of Arabica is going up while the prices of Robusta coffee is going down. So basically, and then if you look at tea also, the tea prices are also slightly increasing. But what affects weighed heavily in the trade trade structure of the economy. So that's the main reason. So why Rwanda? What we observe for Rwanda and other countries who are less affected, while they are also major agriculture exporters, it's happened that they benefited from the prices that of some commodities that they are importing. All right. Production system. So basically that will have a kind of economy-wide effect. So that's and contribute to mitigate the negative impact they're getting from their export. I'll stop here. Thank you for the comment and the questions.
Thank you, Ismail. We have a few minutes for any other questions, and I see there's one question, I believe it's for you, Ismail, that was put in the chat by Hassan Arif. The question being, were there any differences noticed or reviewed in the input costs in the production of staples, such as seeds, agrochemicals, fertilizers? And
say that again, Catherine.
So the question from Hassan was, were there any differences noticed or reviewed in the input costs, such as for seeds, agrochemicals, fertilizers, in the production of staples?
Actually, as I said, the only input cost that we tracked in this analysis, we included in the analysis as far as the global trade of primary commodities concerned is fertilizer prices. So fertilizer prices are going down. So these prices has been included in the analysis. So we did not include other, seeds and agrochemical because the price information were not available, especially if those commodities are imported from by countries. All right. Yeah. So only the fertilizer that has been, included in our analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? If so, you can either use the raise your hand function or you can drop your questions in the chat. If there are none, and at the moment I can't see further questions or hands, there's Cheryl, of course, over to you.
Thank you. I'm curious, Ismail, you put so many commodities in that list that are now really part of the debate around the global crisis. Do you think that that picture is going to change dramatically? And are you going to reflect it in the 2022 ATOR, or are we asking you too much? Thanks.
Cheryl, sorry about that. I think I'm having some issues with my internet. Can you come again with the question?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. Given that you had so many commodities in there, particularly fuel commodities, that are currently affected by the global crisis, do you think this picture is going to change much in 2022?
Good question.
Or am I asking you to be a prophet?
Yeah, actually we are undertaking conducting this kind of analysis for 2022, basically including the supply chain disruption that is still going on with the COVID pandemic. On the top of that, we have now the Ukraine crisis that is also fueling some of the disruption of the global trade. I mean, anything I will say right now without numbers, I'll be speculating, but as far as you can see that for the energy, for instance, things has reversed. In the case of COVID, the prices are going down, but now we're seeing that prices are going up, in many cases, many situations. So basically, at least for energy, probably things will be different. And also for metals. Metals prices now are increasing a little bit because of those countries, especially Russia is also exporter of some key metals. So prices of those metals are going up. So the figures may change because of the nature of the shocks that we are now experiencing. Under the COVID was supply chain disruption, and but also we had a demand effect. So the combination of demand and supply were really key in the case of COVID. And I think the demand effect was, was larger than the supply effect. That's why most prices, at least for energy, was going down. But right now, the demand has, is trying to pick up, and then we have some level of demand from different countries, but the supply is the one that is continuing to be disrupted. So we may have a different story, in terms of price impact. Thank you.
Greater complexity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Ismail. Thank you, Cheryl. I don't see any further questions or hands up at the moment. So there is one coming in now. And there's a question from Patrice talking about demand. Can someone say that COVID-19 can lead to an increase of demand of local food? And I think that can be either for you, Ismail, or for Greenwell.
Well, I can try that one. I can take that one. So I think in some cases, maybe for a short period of time, if people feel like they are so threatened that the lockdown is not going to be eased anytime soon, they might want to just buy as much food as possible. So that's what we saw at first. But I think as countries and policymakers started making it clear that they were not just going to lock everybody out forever, they can allow them to go to shops, things started easing. So under certain circumstances, there could be a short-term increase, maybe a few days or a week. But after that, as things are clear, that changes. Over to you.
Thank you, Greenwell. Is there anything, Ismail, you would like to add to that question?
Can you come again with the question? I'm not seeing it on the chat.
The question was, could you say that COVID-19... Yes, Ismail, can you hear me? There might be an issue with your internet connection. So I think we may have lost Ismail, but Greenwell, there's also a comment for you from Fatima in the chat that perhaps you can review and take into account. It's an observation more than a question. I think we're also coming to the end of this seminar. So Cheryl, I would like to hand over to you for any concluding remarks or thoughts. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our two presenters and to the two commentators. It's been a really rich discussion and very informative. Thank you very much. Cheryl, you're on mute.
Thank you ever so much, Catherine, Ismail, and Greenwell, and also to Ibrahim and Wega for your inputs. And thank you to everybody for participating and for the questions that are rolling in quite late. So please next time start posting them a little earlier into the session. But we're very privileged to be able to hear from such distinguished speakers and the richness of the reports that are generated by Academia 2063. Thank you so much for your partnership. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to another seminar in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.